Hey guys, hope you are all having a great morning. Today we go over the second part of this mini-series. Yesterday, we went over a bit of an overview as to what the different players in Wall Street are, and gave some examples as to how the private sector can infiltrate and manipulate officials at agencies like the SEC to avoid investigation. Today's video is direct continuation to all of what was discussed, so be sure to watch that video in case you missed it so that you are up to date on everything. We are about to really expose what revolving doors mean, because the reality of it is much cruder and more shocking than you might think. In the beginning of the video, things might get a little complex, but as always, I will come to smooth it out for you guys, so please stick with me. Be patient, as this is a ton of information that can only benefit you if you are willing to stick around to the end. Once again, I want to thank Mr. Taibbi, whose phenomenal work has inspired me to make this video. He is a great source of inspiration for me, and this video is based on much of his investigative diligence. We have tons of information and grounds to cover, so before we get started with today's segment, let me quickly disclose and state that I am not a financial analyst or advisor, and that all contents discussed in this video are provided as opinions. All efforts are placed to better understand the nature of the current market in anticipation of the greatest squeeze in financial history. Everything presented is evidence I collect, and all opinions are based on research, experience and knowledge on the matter. Shout out to all my Patreons and one-time donors, who continue to support and carry this channel into greatness. Let's dive right into the good stuff. So, we left off with Gary Aguirre getting fired from his job at the SEC after he complained to his supervisors that obstructions to his interview kept barring him from continuing his investigations. The SEC would actually go on to agree on a $755,000 settlement with Aguirre sometime later after he sued them. That was a bit of a happy ending for him personally, but it speaks volumes about a system that would rather pay for wrongful terminations of their employees rather than prosecute real criminals. It was precisely these types of actions that actually emboldened a wave of Wall Street institutions and executives to start committing a series of crimes ranging from insider trading all the way to fraud. The mountains of evidence were piling up the desks of workers at the SEC from unprecedented crimes, only for the cases to be pushed aside and not followed up. Executives getting caught changing their books to pay themselves higher bonuses to overseeing accounting techniques. At best, the institutions would pay very small fines after collecting huge amounts of profit, with none of the executives being prosecuted. At the very worst, the cases were pushed aside to cabinets where they probably still remain, covered under deep layers of dust. What this created was a clear incentive that was driven all the way up until the financial crisis of 2008. Even the worst criminals that literally were the ones at fault for causing the Great Recession to implode never saw any prosecution. Top players like the Lehman Brothers and AIG, two companies that caused the implosion, were willing and cooperating with governing agencies to supply them all the evidence they had against their very own executives, and nothing ever really came of it. Let me quickly tell you why this is. For the Lehman case, the SEC had a window of about 6 months before the economic crash happened to make a move against their CEO. There was a ton of evidence submitted stating that the bank was using an effective loophole involving restricted stock units in order to hide tens of millions of dollars for the compensation of their CEO Dick Fuld. A Lehman lawyer himself, upon discovering the criminal act that was taking place and notifying his own supervisors about it, was brushed off. He was told that the bank did not care and that the benefits of doing so outweighed the risks. A short time later, the SEC would enact new rules that forced companies to disclose all the compensations that restricted stock units executives had coming from them. This is where the story of Lehman gets interesting. Instead of coming outright and simply presenting the information, their lawyers and accountants filed a statement that covered the real figures. On one page, a chart would describe that Lehman CEO Dick Fuld had gained $146 million, and then on another page, the statement would state that their numbers previously stated were not the real numbers, failing to mention the real figure, which was around $263 million more than they previously stated. The lawyer that noticed all of this had quit his job because of the unethical nature of the business model of Lehman Brothers. He would then go on to contact the SEC many times and even Congress representatives about it, and he would be ignored in all of his attempts. Lehman, along with AIG, would crash the economy not too long after this lawyer quit his job. Imagine his face when Dick Fuld, testifying before the House Government Oversight Committee, would talk about how poor he had become. He would express, and I quote, "I got no severance, no golden parachute. Just so you guys know, Fuld was collected around $529 million from his tenure at Lehman's. Nothing ever came of this. For AIG, the case was even easier. The SEC even had plenty of evidence against them, including eyewitnesses willing to give testimony against the executives at the firm. To make it simple for you guys, AIG was caught overstating their earnings by $3.6 billion, a huge no-no. They were caught making bets on the market, playing with derivatives, which funny enough is exactly the same function championed by the current shorters delaying the meme stock squeeze. After AIG helped lead the economic crash, investigators were building a pretty hefty criminal case against one of their top executives, but as common sense should tell you, the case never went to court. Executives were even told they were not the targets of the investigation, and cleared of wrongdoings. They of course made public appearances before Washington, crying crocodile tears and pulling an Oscar-worthy performance out there, being given a platform to redeem themselves in the eye of the public. Keep in mind guys, though Lehman Brothers and AIG were the big dogs whose misbehavior just happened to become the snowflake to cause the economic avalanche, they weren't the only ones. Goldman Sachs were caught defrauding investors with really bad mortgages. Their executives would never see jail either. Citigroup Bank was caught hiding $40 billion in liabilities from investors. I said billion, not millions. $40 billion hidden away in liabilities from investors. Bank of America was caught hiding $5.8 billion in bonuses from shareholders, with the money going straight into the pockets of executives. Guess how many of these executives were prosecuted? Nobody was prosecuted, nobody went to jail, and these same things have continued to happen, though now the criminals have become more complex as to how they hide their nefarious acts. And the question then becomes, why does this happen? How do things get to this point? I know you guys are frustrated listening to this video, but it's important that you stay with me. I am done with the stories. I am now going to talk to you straight. We need to bring Gary Aguirre one more time, because he is actually the one who found the answer as to why there is no justice in the system. A couple of years ago, Gary Aguirre noticed an announcement post for a huge conference on financial law enforcement. Attendees included around 1,500 of the country's leading lawyers who represented Wall Street, as well as the top members working for the government at the Justice Department and the SEC. The truth is, ladies and gentlemen, that you have been led to believe that criminal justice, that prosecution, is a trial by combat in which the law and the private sector fight it out. This is entirely wrong, and you need to erase this from your mind. Criminal justice is a nice cocktail party between friends and colleagues, who every couple of months or years, tend to switch over from one side to the other. They are all good pals, good friends who even get to meet at an expensive private party at the Hilton Hotel and get to make connections between each other. Aguirre saw familiar faces in that party. The SEC regulators he worked with, the ones barring him from prosecuting John Mack, were now working for firms that represented John Mack himself. He saw his co-workers now working lucrative jobs at prestigious firms. Do you think it ends here? Aguirre would go on to tell how he saw the government's top cops, Preet Bharara, who was an attorney for the Southern District of New York. He was placed in this position due to recommendations by Chuck Schumer, who is one of Wall Street's favorite senators. Gary also saw Robert Khuzami, the SEC's director of enforcement at the time, and who had also served as general counsel for none other than the Deutsche Bank, another notorious institution involved in nefarious acts. Guys, let's take a moment to smooth things out. The revolving door concept that I have been trying to ingrain in a wrinkle into your brains for weeks is not an afterthought. It's not some edgy little concept that gives some answers as to why Wall Street doesn't get punished. It is among the biggest reasons for it. Criminals are allowed to network with government officials, who they then entice into joining the private sector and give them huge salaries where they are set for life. As such, there is a huge conflict of interest that occurs from this. We have evidence that everyone in Wall Street, from the private sector to the public sector, get together, mingle and network. The people trying to bring up cases of evidence against the biggest players are at a no-winning scenario. This is because once they start making noise, the person being investigated just has to call his friend at the SEC and make a case about how this is going to make him look bad, and then he won't be able to hire him or her at a later date. This then causes the SEC employee to shut down the case and put it aside. Furthermore, we have been led to think that even when cases do proceed, there is a huge battle between both sides. This is not the case. As I have disclosed, these huge battles are nothing more than a fine dancing interval between both parties where the SEC proposes them with an agreement that does not require the criminal to admit guilt, nor any executive to be named and prosecuted. They simply agree to pay a small fine for being caught and everything is back in order. There is no prosecution at all, it's just literally an agreement to not proceed with an ugly case. The fines are so small sometimes that some of you could even pay it with a year's worth of your salary. So there is an attempt to not prosecute anyone, and when the Justice Department along with the SEC can't brush it off, they simply agree on a paper to pay pennies on the dollar, something that the company can then use on their accounting to pay even less taxes since they can write these agreements as business expenses. This is why there is no justice for investors and anyone else affected by Wall Street. This is the answer to the big question. I have one more thing I want to share with you guys tomorrow on this subject to finish off this 3-video series with a bang. Before I let you go, I want to address something important. Yesterday's video drove a lot of very pessimistic comments regarding the current nature of our squeeze. People are concerned about the possibility that hedge funds and banks will be allowed to continue doing their schemes and that the squeeze will never manifest because of it. This is wrong. The squeeze will happen because they cannot keep this up forever. From a technical standpoint, under no circumstances or scenarios can they exit their positions, which means that all they can hope is to drag out the process of this, to bore you and cause a ton of uncertainty, which typically drives investors off. As we keep buying, we keep making it harder for them to cover. An economic crash could set off the squeeze, which could be driven by many factors in the economy, though I notably mention inflation as currently being the most obvious one. There are a couple of other big events that could set it off, and the thing is that all of these things will happen eventually, so it isn't even a question of if but rather a question of when. My own personal goal is to keep on buying and informing you guys. They can't cover, they can't drive the majority of people to other stocks, and they can't stop printing fake shares. All they can do is play the game of kicking the can down. I have talked about these subjects plenty of times on this channel, going from swaps to options to stocks themselves. Be sure to watch my afternoon videos as they are typically when I cover this type of stuff. Remain confident. We already own the float, so relax. Like I always say, do let me know your thoughts about the video in general and the main segment. It is so important for you guys to voice your concerns and thoughts on these things, so do not refrain from doing so. Thank you for being here. I hope I was able to give you guys some real perspective on the answers you have been seeking for so long. We have one more video on this tomorrow, and then we will cover a whole new topic for next week's morning videos. If you want to support me in this channel, I have provided links which will be in the description for donations and a Patreon if you would like to pledge a monthly donation of any kind. This support really goes a long way for me guys. All money is spent on improving equipment and other parts of the channel so that we can continue to upgrade the quality of Simulate and Trade. It is my source of income as I am doing this full time now. It makes a huge impact and difference, so if you are able and willing, do consider it. I will see you guys later today. Until then, keep on buying the dip and holding to the moon.